Hello and good morning to everyone. Welcome to another Geointerview by the Geostrata, an independent youth-led think tank which stands for a distinctly Indian take on world affairs. My name is Pradnyan, and for today, our honorable guest is Dr. Luciano Zaccara, a research associate professor in Gulf politics at the Gulf Studies Center at the University of Qatar. Dr. Zaccara is also a visiting assistant professor at Georgetown University and an adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University in Qatar. His research interests are international relations in the Gulf, Iranian politics and foreign policy, and electoral systems in the MENA region. In line with Professor's expertise, the topic for today's Geo interview is how Qatar sees the Middle East. We hope you're doing well, sir, and on behalf of the Geostrata, I wish you a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much for your welcome, and thank you very much for your interest in interviewing me.
Right, sir. So to begin this interview, I would like to take you back to 2022 when Qatar hosted the FIFA World Cup. And it was a rather big event, a grand spectacle, a monumental event in every sense of the word. But what people pointed out was it was part of a larger geopolitical phenomena that was at play, which is Qatar becoming more important, more relevant, and increasingly more visible to the world. Do you agree with this? And how would you view this newer, more prominent version of Qatar?
Well, first of all, the decision taken to give Qatar the World Cup 2022 was taken in 2010. So 12 years before the World Cup, when before the Arab Spring, before the change in the leadership in Qatar. So Qatar was already showing their importance in international relations. It's important for the region, and it's important for the Arab world as a way to showcase how the Arab world was developing at the global stage. As you say, it was a wonderful event that many people criticized since the very beginning. Many people doubted that it would be successful in the way it was organized, and considering that Qatar was a small country and never was done it before. But at the end of the day, we can consider that the World Cup was a success in terms of organization, in terms of showing an image that Qatar wanted to give to the rest of the world, and showing for the first time that even though there was a blockade that affected the Qatar 3 years before the World Cup, however, there was a kind of unity among the GCC states, mainly supporting the World Cup hosted by Qatar. Actually, the second biggest delegation of fans came from Saudi Arabia, formerly blockading country, and they were welcomed as nothing had happened before. So I would say that this showed to some extent, and also helped contributed to increase Qatar image beyond the first world, beyond the developed world. Of course, the image in the European context or in the developed world was not changing that much. The issues that they were criticizing Qatar for regarding human rights, regarding workers' rights, were still there. But the image of Qatar in Latin America, mainly in Africa and Asian countries, improved a lot. The PR campaign, the fact that a lot of people came here from Mexico, from Argentina, from many other countries, South Korea, Japan, etc., and they came back to their homes, reporting nothing wrong, reporting that there was no problem, there was not a single incident like it happened in other World Cups, contributed to improve the image of Qatar worldwide. So I would say that we can make a change, we can make a difference between what happened before and after the World Cup. The image of Qatar, broadly speaking, improved, contributed to put Qatar very clearly in the map for those who did not know where Qatar was, and contributed to show that here in Qatar, it's possible to live, it's possible to work, it's possible to coexist, it's possible to conduct events in a region that is not always considered stable and attractive, considering the conflicts that we have around, and they are affecting terribly the region.
Right, Professor. So I think with Qatar becoming more important, its geopolitical responsibilities would increase as well. Um, Moving on, how do you think Qatar views its role in Middle Eastern diplomacy, particularly in context of the regional conflicts and tensions?
Well, Qatar has been developing since long time ago. One role that is particularly recognized due to their mediation capacity. I mean, many things were written about Qatar mediating even before the Arab Spring in 2008 in different conflicts that had took place in the Middle East region, mainly in Lebanon, in some areas of Africa. But this diplomatic skill, I would say, started to improve exponentially after the Arab Spring, after a very assertive involvement of Qatar in different conflicts in the region that sometimes was not very positive for Qatar in terms of the criticism it received and in terms of how developments were changing the fate of some countries, considering the support of Morsi in Egypt that then was overthrown by Sisi, support for different groups that actually opposed to other groups that they were supported by Saudi Arabia or Emirates that brought the conflict within the GCC context. But Qatar started to have a much more relevant role in promoting some kind of dialogue, some kind of political negotiation, even though sometimes political negotiation at the international level are not 100% positive for the people, but at least are trying to resolve long-term conflicts. Following that role of mediation, Qatar also contributed to the United States policy in the region. The two main cases that we can refer to is to host a delegation from the Taliban here in Qatar and hosting Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas here in Qatar as well, following the petition from the US, so the US could have a direct interlocutor or a direct connection with these two non-state actors in order to deal with any problem that could emerge, and the problems actually emerged. The negotiations that they were held here in Doha during the transition towards the American presence in Afghanistan that finally ended with the Taliban control of the whole country were done here in Qatar. Whether we like it or not, what happened, the mediation of Qatar contributed to evacuate many people from Afghanistan that they were in danger there, contributed to avoid, at least initially, a bloodshed in the transition process. Also, the fact that Ismail Haniyeh is here contributed to some extent to negotiate some aspect of the Gaza conflict that we are witnessing now. It was possible for the Iranian, because Qatar also has a very good relation with Iran, contributed to mediate between Iran and the United States. So it's possible to say that Qatar is using its leverage in the whole region, in the Middle East, in West Asia, and even in Central Asia, to mediate with some states, mainly the United States, in order to achieve some diplomatic goals, even though minimal, sometimes regarding to humanitarian issues, liberation of hostages, in exchange of prisoners, etc., that to some extent are putting Qatar in a stage that is showing their interest in solving problems rather than creating them. Of course, this is not agreed by the whole academic community, and of course, from the political point of view, the relations that Qatar has with some non-state actors is considered detrimental for the stability. But this is more or less how Qatar sees itself, a country that is actually trying to use the relations, trying to use their wasta, as it is called in the Arab world, to promote some exchanges, to promote peace, to promote stability, and to promote dialogue.
Right, Professor. You had spoken about the conflict that is going on in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas. How do you think Qatar is managing its relationship with its Gulf states, its neighboring Gulf states, in the light of this Israel-Hamas conflict? If you could elaborate.
Qatar, well, as I said before, Qatar is using its connection, it's using its leverage that has in the region. I mean, we have to say that Qatar has been also attacked during this conflict, because actually hosting Haniyeh, and even the United States, some congressmen and some members of the State Department were accusing of Qatar of hosting Haniyeh, and Qatar had to officially complain about that. You remember that you were the ones asking me to host Haniyeh, so we are surprised that the United States is complaining when we are doing what the United States wanted. That said, Qatar is using these relations to try to negotiate or to involve all the parties in this conversation to solve the issue, allowing Iran to come here to Qatar to meet Haniyeh, meeting Iranians, meeting Americans, having direct conversation with leaders from Emirates and from Saudi Arabia, mainly, that they are also important actors in the region. We have to say that the blockade that affected Qatar between 2017 and 2020 affected to some extent the trust that Qataris mainly had with Saudi Arabia and Emirates, but so far the situations have been solved, at least at the diplomatic level, has very good connections with both, and there are, I would say, almost permanent conversation between Tamim, Sheikh Zayed, and Mohammed bin Salman in different issues. Recently, it was decided within the GCC context to start having a visa common for all the GCC states, which was a huge development, considering that many people consider that the GCC was already dead after what happened with the blockade. So, despite this distrust that was raising after the blockade, Qatar government decided to move forward, to leave behind what happened during the blockade, and to keep working in the coordination of policies within the GCC context. And coordinating policy with the GCC context means that you need to sit with the two main actors apart from Qatar, mainly Saudi Arabia and Emirates. So Qatar has a very good relation with the two states, and I assume that they are trying to work together in order to fix some of the issues with the Gaza. You know that Bahrain and Emirates signed already the Abraham Accord, so the positions between and Saudi Arabia was about to sign it, which is reflected in the last summit, Arab Muslim summit, that Emirates, Egypt, Saudi, and Bahrain voted against some resolution that they were asking some changes to the Israeli government. So there are still differences between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Emirates regarding how to face the Israel-Hamas conflict, but there are attempts between the states trying to solve at least at the diplomatic level, trying to ease the tensions between, trying to avoid the expansion of the conflict, trying to liberate the hostages on one hand, and try to push Israel to stop or to paralyze the attacks against Gaza.
Right. So diplomatic deliberations are on from the Qatari side. Would that be a fair assumption to make?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Professor, as we know, the Middle East is a complex area geopolitically, diplomatically. It's very intricate. So I want to know from your perspective, sir, from Qatar's standpoint, what do you think are the key factors driving current conflicts in the Middle East?
I mean, when you talk about the Middle East, you are considering the whole region. There are many factors that are affecting, unfortunately. If we are talking specifically about the Gaza conflict, I would say the failure of the international community to make Israel to comply with international regulation and to comply with the humanitarian obligations of foreign countries, and mainly because of the unconditional support from the United States. This is one factor that is creating more confrontation in the region and is showing clearly the inequities that exist in the region. Other elements are I would say, sometimes artificial confrontation that exists between the two main poles, Saudi Arabia and Iran that, according to some people, is based on sectarianism. In other cases, it's basically confrontation between two different political systems with different legitimacies, that they are somehow rooted in religious values, but not necessarily means that there is a religious or sectarian confrontation, but they have been exploited politically. And at the end of the day, I would say the authoritarian or semi-authoritarian character of most of the countries in the region that give priority to regime survival over any other consideration. This, of course, is affecting the way in which states interact among them. It's impossible to think that the Middle East in general would behave like European Union countries that decided to leave apart their problems to coordinate policies at all levels. We have some attempts, but it's difficult to think that political regimes that they are thinking only on their own survival, or mainly political elites that they are thinking on their own survivals, would negotiate something with an external power that, according to them, represent a threat. And here, threat perceptions are considered as a threat perception to the stability of the political regimes and to the survival of the political elites. As far as this threat perception is represented by many elements that had to do with territorial claims, border issues, ethnic, religious, political, geopolitical, geoeconomic problems, it would be very difficult to navigate those waters. So I would say, in general, in conclusion, that there are many factors, a combination of factors that makes the region to be unable to pacify totally.
Right. A lot of key factors is what I took from your answer. And one thing that is the Middle East is diverse. All the various countries in the Middle East are diverse, at least politically. Each of the countries in the Middle East and the Gulf have a different political background, different political context. So it's really hard to gain some sort of consensus on all matters, is what I've taken from your answer, sir. How do you think, sir, Qatar is addressing the issue of extremism within the region? And do you think Qatar is taking any measures to prevent the spread of radical ideologies? And if it is, please elaborate on what these measures are.
Well, if we go back to the beginning of the blockade, the blockading countries issued a list of demands, 13 lists of demands against Qatar to end the blockade, and one of them was the support of terrorism. So the accusation came from other countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Emirates that also are or have been under the accusation of contributing to the spread of radical Islamic groups, mainly considering the origin of Bin Laden and many controversies about the origin of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So this accusation coming from the blockading country was kind of surprising for Qatar, and that's why the international community actually did not give that much credit to that, apart from the famous tweet of Trump that was claiming that he was right, pointing at Qatar. In any case, after this happened, there was a huge effort from the Qatari side in signing different international agreements pushed by the United States and by the international community to make to promote transparency in bank transfer and money transfer to third actors, mainly, for instance, the money that is going to Gaza. I mean, there has been a lot of criticism about Qatar supporting Hamas directly. Qatar has been claiming that actually they transfer a lot of money to support the Gaza administration is done through Israel authorities and under the supervision of the United Nations. So Qatar made sure that there is a transparent transfer of money towards the people that they really need it in terms of administration, therefore humanitarian aid, which is something that Qatar is trying to do at all levels, signing different agreements that shows where the money is going in terms of charity, in terms of who is receiving money in third countries, mainly in the Arab world and Africa, that they can benefit from this charity, and that the money is not transferred to radical groups. If that is 100% effective, it's very difficult to determine, but at least Qatar at the governmental level has been following or has been complying with the demands of the international community to prevent being accused of transferring money to groups that they are radical. On the other hand, there's of course a political position regarding some groups that they are considered as terrorist groups by other countries. For instance, Muslim Brotherhood is a political group that participated in the elections in Egypt, that they participate with different franchises in many countries, and even here in the GCC context, in Bahrain and Kuwait, Muslim Brothers are not considered terrorists, are considered political groups that they participate formally in elections. Qatar has good relations with them at international level, but Saudi and Emirates decided that the Muslim Brothers are terrorists. Therefore, Qatar, according to some countries, is supporting or has good relations with or is hosting members of the terrorist groups. But this is a matter of permanent discussion whether some groups are considered terrorists by whom? By international organizations like the European Union, the US, other countries. So Qatar is trying to show that they have no problem in dealing with the Muslim Brothers because they don't consider terrorist organization, and actually they contribute to the political debate in many countries north of Africa, Middle East, and even in the Arabian Peninsula. Apart from that, Qatar is trying to make sure that, for instance, the support to the transition in Afghanistan had nothing to do with the support of radicalism or a terrorist group, but in order to help humanitarian work, in order to help the US to evacuate the people, in order to help the transition or the transition toward the political regime that neither Qatar is happy. I mean, we have to say that Qatar complained about many developments that were happening later because the Taliban government was not complying with which was agreed here in Doha, and Qatar made clear, mainly regarding treatment against women and radicalization in that sense. The problem is the same that it's affecting or has been affecting Qatar before is affecting Qatar now. Qatar has a lot of leverage with some countries, but it's still a small country, and their diplomacy is not as massive as it can be in the United States. There are not enough manpower, there are not enough Qataris working in the diplomatic offices with a reduced amount of people working at the diplomatic level. You cannot expect to have an embassy that is occupied by 20 or 30 diplomats because there are not enough. So sometimes the same constraints that are affecting Qatar in some levels are affecting on the others that require or that demand more attention from the international community.
Right, Professor. That's a very interesting take on the question. Based on the current trends, what do you think are Qatar's predictions for the future of the Middle East and the Gulf? How does it plan to navigate the potential challenges that you just elaborated? And what do you think is its general vision for achieving long-term peace and stability in the region?
Well, I wish I can reply this question in a more scientific way. I can give you only my opinion. I am afraid that at this point I can say that maybe Qatar is overthinking or overestimating its own capacity to influence in the region. Of course, Qatar can exert a lot of influence in different aspects, but as I said before, even though they can mediate or negotiate between different countries, they cannot push or they cannot pressure countries to do what they have to do. Whether they contributed between, they contributed the mediation between the US and the Taliban, Qatar has no tools to push the Taliban to do or not to do what they are doing. The same can be said about other scenarios. So Qatar can see or can think in extending their scope of mediation. Recently was mentioned that Qatar was trying to mediate between Venezuela and the United States to reconvene the two parts. It's something that they can do. I mean, they always claim that if they are asked by two actors to mediate, they will do it. They have the tools to do so. But at the end of the day, they have no enough power to push the two sides that they sign an agreement to do or to comply with the agreement. So I assume that Qatar has a limitation in their role at the international level, which other countries maybe they don't have. I mean, Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, in the negative way, used their power in Yemen war, that it was not constructive at all and created a big problem. But Saudi Arabia has some tools that can be used in a more assertive way than Qatar. And this is something that Saudi Arabia is trying to do as well. So Saudi Arabia realized how important has been for Qatar the mediation role, and it's trying to exercise similar kind of role, trying to increase or to improve its image worldwide, and started to claim that they can also be a mediator, but having other tools that make countries to comply with the agreements. So I see Qatar role as still an important role in the region, trying to sit or to provide a venue to sit people together and to discuss, but limited considering what we need in the region. For instance, I'm talking specifically about the Gaza conflict. Qatar can help, as well as maybe Saudi Arabia and Iran can help if they sit together and decide to reduce the tension or can prevent the expansion of the conflict. But Qatar has no power to avoid the massacre that is going on in Gaza right now. They cannot stop Israel, and they cannot neither stop Hamas. The same that the Iranians claim, that they're independent and they cannot control them 100%. So how Qatar see the future? I mean, I don't think nobody can say now how we see the future, because before the war that started on 7th October, there were some trends in the region that they were showing a favorable trend. I mean, the negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, normalization. I mean, two trends: normalization between Arab states and Israel on one side, and normalization within the Gulf, Iran. I mean, Alula agreements that solved the issue within the GCC, negotiations between Emirates, Saudi, and Iran, that they were two different trends, but they were solving major issues within the states that somehow were showing, okay, it's possible to think about at least a stable future without interstate conflicts. This was something that everybody was discussing, and we were thinking about, okay, at least we have 2, 3, 4 years of stability without the big issue happening. And suddenly we got the Gaza war that absolutely destroyed everything, and again started to add confrontation and forcing states to take positions. So I don't think Qataris can be optimistic right now about Qatari role, and optimistic about achieving a stable situation and a long-term solution for a conflict that has been lasted for 40, 50 years.
Right, so interesting. Would it be fair to assume that the current conflict in Gaza opened or widened existing fault lines, and that has kind of blurred Qatar's vision for the future of a more stable, safe Middle East?
I mean, the Gaza conflict has been there, latent, and since the signature of the Abraham Accords, basically leaving the Palestinians on their own fate. I mean, it was predictable that something like that would happen, because apart from normalizing relations between Arab states and Israel, there was nothing else. So there was no solution. There was no push for the two-state solution. There was not push for humanitarian support to the Gaza. There were not political solution for the Gaza people. So this was predictable. Whether states were trying to avoid entering into that conflict is something different. But the tensions were there. I mean, Iran was very clear about normalizations in the very beginning, Qatar as well. They said, we will never sign, we will never accept Israel, we will never sign that, even though Qatar has relations with Israel because they need to transfer money through Israel to Gaza, but there was no, I mean, it never has been in the agenda to recognize or to normalize with Israel. Something that it has been in the Saudi agenda. It was not in the agenda of Iranians either. This conflict, what is made is to reaffirm Iran and Qatar in their own position. So the Iranians said, we said, you cannot negotiate, you cannot normalize with Israel. There's no way we can accept that. And Qatar, they say, okay, we keep supporting the Gaza administration, but this shows that Israel is the one to be blamed for what is going on. The other countries were forced to think about what they were doing. I mean, of course, the normalization between Israel and Saudi is now paralyzed. And even the countries that they already normalized have been pressured by their own public opinion about continuing or not with this relation with Israel. And they are showing that a much bigger gap between what the population think and what the population support and the decision that they are taking at official level. So, of course, this is actually showing that the conflict that has been there unsolved for so many years, even though the governments decided to go to one path, people still think otherwise. So it's resurfacing all conflicts that existed and is showing the discrepancies or the inconsistencies that some governments are showing in terms of foreign policy regarding their own people's orientation. I cannot see that this will end in a very constructive way if the conflict keeps evolving and keeps expanding. The only countries that would benefit from that are countries like Iran, that they keep the same discourse and they didn't change the discourse since 1979.
Right, sir. That's interesting. During our conversation, you had actually hit upon the fact that the two major driving influential powers in the Gulf region or in the Middle East are Saudi Arabia and Iran. And so let's talk about Iran a bit, a very important power in the Middle East. How do you assess Iran's use of proxy groups as a tool for advancing its regional objectives?
Well, this is a very interesting topic because, I mean, there have been a lot of things written about that and discussions about that. I always claim that it's very difficult to assess exactly how far Iran can go in terms of mobilizing the force. I mean, we know that Iran has been always threatening the United States, Israel mainly, about Iranian capacity to mobilize forces in Yemen, in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, etc., the axis of resistance forces, if they are attacked or if they consider that they need to mobilize them to support, for instance, the Palestinian cause. However, every time there is a kind of attack or something that affects the interests of other states, Iran claims that they are not giving orders to these groups, that they have coordination, that they have support. But even in that recent attack by Hamas on Israel, Iran claimed that they had nothing to do. And actually, so far, there has not been evidence, neither from the Israeli or the American side, that Iran had a direct implication in the attack. So they have this capacity to use a threat, saying that we can mobilize that, and on the other hand, claiming that we have nothing to do with that. They're independent, they can act. So this gives an ambiguous position of Iran regarding these things. Actually, if we analyze what is happening in Gaza war right now, we see that one of the most expected discourses was Nasrallah a couple of weeks ago, and everybody was expecting Nasrallah to announce a second front, and actually Nasrallah did not do so. The Houthis did something, but they are very far, and of course, they will not be affected by that. They can afford doing that without risking long-term conflict with Israel, but Lebanon is a different case. Iran can push to certain limits Hezbollah to do so, but Hezbollah is also following their own calculations, internal calculation within Lebanon, that to some extent detach them from Tehran, that they can make decisions based not on Tehran interests, but on their own interests that had to do with Lebanese society, Lebanese state, Lebanese future. So that said, Iran has used this or has been using this as a leverage, but it's a leverage that not always has been realized, has been materialized. They can use the influence when there is a coordination of interest between this proxy and Iran. If there is not such interest, if the Lebanese Hezbollah decided, no, we are not going to enter in a war because they are going to annihilate us, they're going to destroy the Lebanese economy, and we are not going to gain anything from aligning directly with Tehran, they will not do it. The same happened with the different groups in Iraq, in Yemen, and other cases. When there is a exact coordination of interest, they will act in a way that they show their support to Iran. I mean, the militias in Iraq were clearly at that point. When they felt that being linked to Iran was helping them to increase their leverage within the Iraqi political system, they showed their alignment with Iran, including Muqtada al-Sadr. Once these interests were not the same and they had other calculations, they decided to separate from Tehran, and even Tehran was upset with some groups in Iraq showing that they are not aligned with them anymore. But al-Sadr and other groups, they showed that okay, we are independent now, we don't need Iran to tell us, we don't need Iran coordination. So, of course, this is a matter of international politics using state and non-state actors in the region to increase leverage and to navigate that. But I think that sometimes the Iranian capacity is overestimated by third countries, but also by Iranian officials as well.
Right, sir. You had mentioned in one of your answers that how the Qatari government is willing to rely on deliberation, is willing to come to the negotiating table, is willing to mediate in the various issues that are present in the Middle East. So in context to that, are there any collaborative efforts between Qatari and Iranian academic institutions or any other institutions to foster a real dialogue and understanding of these issues?
Actually, there are. I mean, you know that because Iran has been under heavy sanctions from the international community, from the European Union, from the US, and they had no diplomatic relations with many GCC states. The areas of cooperation between Iranian academics and the rest of the world were very limited. There is a huge gap in the academic research in the US because this lack of connections between Iran and the United States. Only the Iranian diaspora in the US is producing research about Iran, which is somehow one-sided, but there's no connection. There is no American student or professor that can travel to Iran, and therefore there are no Iranian faculty that they can travel to the US to do research because of visa issues, etc. So this is creating a vacuum of actual research that can contribute to understanding what is going on in Iran and what is going on in the US. This is reproduced also in the region when you don't have connections, when the only people that can discuss about Iranian politics are people that they haven't been in Iran or they don't know Iran, hinder the capacity to understand what is going on in the country. Here in Qatar, we don't have this issue. We have some constraints or some limitations, but there has been some exchanges in the past. Of course, when you have Qatar belonging to the GCC, they have to comply also with some constraints or some concerns that exist in the other GCC states. The second of the demands, 13 demands that were issued by the court in 2017, the blockade in Qatar was to cut relations with Iran. So meaning that, I mean, they were accusing Qatar of bringing Iran inside the GCC. So the relations that Iran with Qatar had or has, that they are good, cordial, were considered as a threat for other GCC states. So bringing academics or having academic discussion has been also part of the debate. Why giving the voice to Iranians? Why allowing Iranians to come here to Qatar? That said, there are agreements. There are sometimes workshops that they are organized between some of. I mean, my own center. We organize many events bringing Iranians, diplomats and scholars. Even Khaldun Center here in Qatar University organize things with the think tanks and universities in Iran. Al Jazeera Center also has a very special relation with the Council of Foreign Relations, and every year they have an annual event in which last year, for the first time, they were included diplomats and experts from other GCC states, including Saudi Arabia. So Qatar is trying to also to become a hub in which faculty and diplomats from other countries can have academic discussion, track 1, track 2 discussions here. As I said, we had in 2015 one big event here in my center that I organized myself. But since the blockade happened, it was very difficult to engage with other GCC states. So it became much more a bilateral issue between Iran and Saudi. But again, Qatar has been and is trying to be a hub for academic discussion, free academic discussion within people from all over the world here. And we try to push this to happen. Sometimes we have limitations, sometimes when we have the blockade, when we have sanctions, etc., there are some constraints. Because also, as I said before, the survival and the stability of the political regimes in the region is a priority. So nobody wants anybody to come here to destabilize the country. But so far, I can say that 13 years being here in Qatar, I could see positive trends in that sense that are not visible in other GCC states, with the exception of Kuwait, maybe.
So there's a lot of non-governmental engagement that goes on between Qatar and other countries, and even that includes Qatar and Iran, if I am correct. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir.
Yeah, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are.
It is present.
There is it's not forbidden, it's not taboo, it's something that can be done. But it depends on the interest and depends on the willingness to do so.
Right. That's insightful. Professor, since we're an Indian think tank, what do you think, are there any opportunities that you see in India-Iran and India-Qatar engagement? And how do you think India can play a role in the region?
Well, the problem with the India that this has been seen in the region, I mean, for instance, the India position regarding the Gaza conflict has been criticized by Muslim countries. So there is kind of reservation about having a strong ties with India, despite the fact that the Indians are the biggest community in Qatar and in most of the GCC countries. So there is room for a big and a wonderful relation between the GCC states and Iran with India as a country and with the Indian community. There are cultural agreements between India and many countries in the Gulf region, considering both the GCC and Iran, but sometimes there are ideological or political constraints that are preventing these agreements to materialize. In the Iranian case, is very clear. There was a strategic agreement signed in 2016 after the JCPOA was signed. Iran signed agreements with South Korea, India, China, Japan, and the Indian one took a lot of time to materialize. Now we can say that there are some issues that they have been solved, and now Iran can move forward in the relation in improving the relation with India. But I would say that the position that India had mainly regarding Israel and regarding United States has been an impediment for improving relations, which is not what happened. I mean, as I mentioned before, the normalization between some GCC states and and Israel did not prevent Iran to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia and Emirates, but they are forced to have good relations because we live in the same neighborhood. With the Indian case, it's not the same. So India is a big power. It's one of the biggest powers in the world. But Iran is trying to search for alternative options that replace the European Union and the United States. India was one of this possible alternatives, but so far it's China which is fulfilling that role. Russia to some extent. India can be one of those parts, but depending on how ideological and political constraints are affecting that bilateral relation. Agreements are there. There are infrastructure projects that they are signed, that they will be developed sooner or later, depending on the interest of both and the willingness of both states to overcome these differences. What I'm doing some research on that issue specifically. I'm trying to see that what are the prospects for future, considering that Iran will join the BRICS in January. Of course, BRICS membership is because there was an agreement between the first 5 members to invite Iran, so meaning that India is interested in including Iran within BRICS. So this opened a broader room for negotiation and broader room for conversations between Iran and India that I am sure that for the Iranian case will imply a big boost in their interest in increasing at least commercial relations between India and Iran. The same can be said about Saudi Arabia and Emirates, that they are also entering into BRICS. So BRICS can be a good forum of regional conversation in which India can deal with Iran, Emirates, and Saudi at the same time without having bigger issues. Sorry, my phone was ringing.
No problem, Professor. Last question. It's actually a 2-part question. With your valued experience, and you've spent years in research on the Middle East politics and the intricate nature of Middle East politics, what is your advice to the various entities in the Middle East to maintain long-term peace and stability? And the second part of the question is, what is your message to the young people in India and all over the world who are interested in the complex nature of Gulf politics?
What a question. What would be my opinion about, unfortunately, the other day, Dominique Villepin, the former foreign minister of France, gave a wonderful interview, explained that as far as there is no justice, you cannot expect peace. So peace can be brought upon peace or equity in the region. The normalization between some Arab states and Israel was done on the detriment of the Palestinians. So we cannot claim that this was an agreement that contributed to expand justice in the region. So as far as we don't achieve justice for populations, not for government, for populations, it's impossible to think about stable peace. You can have stability as far as you manage to control populations, as far as you manage to repress demands, as far as you succeed in repressing complaints. But this is not justice. So the problem will be always there. And this is applicable to all the countries in the region. So the main problem is the lack of justice, the lack of equity, the lack of democracy in the region. The problem is that democracy is not in the agenda anymore since a long time ago. Unfortunately, Trump, and I'm tired of repeating this, since Trump arrived to power, it was clear that the United States was not interested in pushing for democratization anymore, that the interests of the United States are state interests rather than values or principles interests. Without that support from the United States, the European Union showed that it's toothless to to follow up with this agenda, and they are immersed in many big problems like the Ukrainian issue, the migration issue, the rise of the far right in Europe. So nobody's pushing for that. Nobody's pushing for justice, human rights respect, democratization in the Middle East. Neither the governments are interested when democratization can drive to regime change through raising trends that they are not desired. For instance, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, as it happened 2012. So there is no element that can help us to understand that improvement of political and human rights will happen in the region. And if this is not happening, the conflicts will remain there. You can have stability, but this doesn't mean that the problems disappear. So the long-term goal for me is achieving justice, achieving equity, achieving social justice within the populations in the region. And the Gaza was showing very clearly that this is not, we are not even close to that. And
right,
I mean,
Professor. And what is your message?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I mean, the message for the Indian youth is India is considered the biggest democracy in terms of population that votes. But as far as I'm not an expert in India at all, but as far as I understand, India is also having a strong push for nationalistic views lately, which I think is pushing India to be a much more locally focused state rather than a country that can foster precisely those principles of democracy and human rights and equity beyond its own limits. So my message to youth would be to be more globalistic in terms of kind of principles that can be exported, and try to reduce the nationalistic perception that only create confrontation between states and between populations, which is, I think, the most problematic issue right now.
Right, Professor. With that, we come to the end of the Geo interview. Thank you so much, Professor Zaccara, for speaking with us today, for taking out time from your busy schedule and being here with us, sharing your valuable insights. I'm sure our audience and our viewers would now have a clearer understanding of the intricate and complex situations in the Middle East and the role that Qatar has to play in it. It's been an honor talking to you, sir, and we look forward to many more such conversations and collaborative partnerships. Once again, on behalf of the Geostrata, a very big thank you to you, Professor.
Thank you very much for your invitation, for your interest, and for your time. And I hope this can help your community to understand a little bit more about the region. Thank you.